for his leadership and commitment to protecting America's security and preserving America's highest ideals, we are pleased and proud to present the 2013 Centennial Year William and Naomi Gorwitz Institute Service Award to Leon Panetta.
I think I first learned about the ADL when I was in Congress and had the opportunity to be able to learn about it. I stayed with several members of Congress, those of us who came back to Washington and did not have our families accompany us. We stayed together, and it was, I think it's fair to say, it was Animal House on Capitol Hill. One of those members was Chuck Schumer, who's someone that obviously you all know and who has a tremendous passion for Israel that is deep and infectious and has a great passion for a lot of things. We slept in the bottom of the house in the living room area. He slept on a couch, and I slept in a made-up bed. And every night before we went to sleep, I tried to get him to say a Hail Mary. And he made me say the Shema. We tried to cover all the bases, and we did. And I learned a lot from him. Learned a lot about what the ADL was all about and what it did. And the reason I guess I particularly appreciate the work that you do is because I am the son of immigrants. Most of you are the sons and daughters or grandsons and granddaughters of immigrants. That's a story I know well. My parents came to this country in the early 1930s, and like millions of other immigrants, had very little money, knew very little English, few skills. They came through Ellis Island and managed ultimately to make their way to my hometown of Monterey. I used to ask my father, why did he travel all of that distance? Leaving, obviously there was poverty in the area of Italy that they lived in, but they had the comfort of family. Why would you leave all of that to come to a strange land? And my father said to me, it was because your mother and I believed we could give our children a better life. And that is the American dream. That's what we want for our children, and hopefully our children will want for theirs. But dreams are just dreams. As my father used to say, dreams are just dreams. Unless you're willing to work for it, unless you're willing to sacrifice, unless you're willing to take risks, unless you're willing to fight for what you believe in. Those are the values that my parents had and the values they passed on to me. They were tough. People that, had to make their way in a strange society, but they knew that there was opportunity here. My dad started a restaurant in downtown Monterey during the war years. Tough time. And my earliest recollections were washing glasses in that restaurant because my parents believed that child labor was a requirement. He then, after the war, sold the restaurant and moved out, bought a farm in Carmel Valley, where we actually continue to reside now. Planted a walnut orchard, and he used to go around with a pole and hook, and my brother and I used to be underneath collecting the walnuts. When I got elected to Congress, my father said I'd been well trained to go to Washington because I'd been dodging nuts all my life. The values of my parents, those values of hard work and sacrifice and commitment and dedication and fighting for what you want to achieve, those are the values, frankly, that made America great. And it is those who are willing to respond to the trumpet, to the call to service, that helps preserve our democracy for the future. This dinner, in many ways, honors people who have answered the basic call to public service. You've been asked to serve your community with your philanthropy, and more importantly, with your time, with your commitment, and with your energy. Tonight, as I accept this award, I would like to share it with all of those that have served with me in my different capacities, because it is their service and their commitment that made whatever I was able to achieve happen. My own personal commitment to public service was from my parents, who said I and my brother owed something back to this country for what this country had given them. 2 years in the Army, learning about what it meant to work together for a common mission, learning what it meant to be willing to sacrifice in order to accomplish a difficult mission. And a young president who said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for this country. That's what inspired me to get involved in public service. And that was the reason I went back to Washington as a young legislative assistant. And ultimately, the reason I headed up the U.S. Office for Civil Rights, and it was tough. Desegregating schools in the South during that time was not easy. But the people in the Office for Civil Rights were dedicated to accomplishing the task of giving kids an equal education. At the time, President Nixon, as you know, pursued the Southern strategy and made a deal with Strom Thurmond that they were going to back off of strong civil rights enforcement. And I had to make a basic decision at that time. Do I uphold the law and back off of my principles? Do I fight for what I believe in, or do I sacrifice my job? I lost my job, but I have never regretted the decision of standing for what you believe in. Went back to Monterey, and public service was still in my veins, ran for Congress, served 8 terms in the Congress, and I have to say that it was a different Congress. Speaker Tip O'Neill, Bob Michael, people that we just honored the other day, Tom Foley, who was a speaker and majority leader. Republicans and Democrats worked together. They worked together to try to solve the problems facing this country. Yes, they had their differences. Yes, they had their politics. But when it came to issues affecting this country, they worked together for the common good. And that's the way our democracy should work. President Clinton asked me then to take over the Office of Management and Budget. And the good people there helped work with me and the president to develop the Clinton economic plan. And as a result of that, and as a result of the work that was done on budget summits and budget agreements, we ultimately balanced the federal budget. Remember that? We balanced the federal budget. And it was done because people were willing to work together to be able to accomplish that. When I returned to Monterey after that service, my wife and I started the Panetta Institute because we wanted to inspire young people to get into public life and public service. That's the heart and soul of our democracy. And in 2009, the trumpet sounded again for me, and President Obama asked if I would consider running the CIA. I have to be honest with you, I was reluctant at first. But then I looked at the challenges that were facing this nation. 2 wars, the war on terrorism after 9/11, Al-Qaeda's leadership in hiding in Pakistan and continuing to spread their influence and their effort to try to attack this country, Iran, North Korea, their nuclear programs were moving forward. And so again, I came back to federal service and returned to Washington. At the CIA, I had really two major objectives. One was to restore the credibility of that agency that had been badly damaged, and that's what the President asked me to do. Second was to disrupt, dismantle, and ultimately defeat the terrorists who attacked this country on 9/11. CIA is made up of professionals. They aren't Republican, they aren't Democrats, they aren't political. They are good public servants, good Americans, who come to work every day looking to do what's best for this country, to keep America safe, to keep America safe. That is the key to what the CIA and the intelligence agencies are all about. The President also asked that I go after bin Laden. And at that time, the trail was pretty cold. We had a team at Langley that was responsible for the mission. I asked for weekly updates. In the fall of 2009, we learned how difficult it would be in the struggle to try to find bin Laden and his leadership. We had a lead on number 2, Zawahiri. We had an asset that we were going to meet at a place called Host along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. We were going to meet with him. He was a doctor who said he could lead us to Zawahiri. On December 30th, that asset arrived at the base. And just after getting out the car, within 30 feet of our officers, the asset detonated an explosive vest with ball bearings that tore through the compound and through the agents that were there. He was a double agent and had lured our officers into a deadly trap. 7 CIA officers were killed. I met the caskets when they arrived at Dover Air Base. It was a bitterly cold January day, and we stood at attention as the 7 flag-draped coffins were loaded off of a C-17. Those are the kind of people that gave their lives in order to protect this country. And it gave us the inspiration to do everything we could to go after bin Laden. Finally, we got the break that we wanted. The team followed a group of couriers. We found this compound in Abbottabad, a compound that was 8 times larger than anything else in the area, 12-foot high walls, a 7-foot wall on the 3rd floor balcony, residents who never left, had no telephone, conducted themselves in highly secure ways, a mysterious family living on the 3rd floor. After a great deal of surveillance, we came to the conclusion that there was a strong possibility that bin Laden was there. And I can remember when the President went around the room and asked whether or not we ought to conduct that operation. I said, I have a very simple test, Mr. President, that I've often used in politics, which is to ask the average citizen, if you knew what I do about the intelligence on bin Laden, that this was the best intelligence we had since Tora Bora, what would you do? I think the average American would want us to conduct that operation. And the President, to his credit, said we should. And the mission was a go. And 24 of our best and brightest went into harm's way, 150 miles at night into Pakistan, and conducted that operation with great skill and great determination. And they sent a message to the world that nobody attacks the United States of America and gets away with it. Frankly, after the bin Laden operation, I thought it was time to get the hell out and go back home. But again, the President asked if I would serve as Secretary of Defense. 3 million people, 2 million in uniform, a huge bureaucracy, but again, very dedicated people who want to keep America safe. And we were able to accomplish a great deal in ending the war in Iraq, beginning the drawdown in Afghanistan, working with our NATO allies to get rid of Gaddafi. We implemented unprecedented sanctions and pressure on Iran, uniting the world against their nuclear ambitions and making clear that they must not close the Straits of Hormuz and not develop a nuclear weapon. Yes, I think we clearly should negotiate to determine whether they're serious about dealing with their nuclear capability. But we have to maintain a healthy skepticism. It is the supreme leader that is the key. The supreme leader. And they are not likely to agree to give up enrichment. And so therefore, we must remain strong. We must remain consistent that they must never, never be able to develop a nuclear weapon, and that we may very well have to use military force to back up our policy. And we worked together to make sure that everyone would have the opportunity to serve in our military. That's what this organization is about, giving everybody the opportunity to serve when they want to. Men, women, regardless of sexual orientation, people who want to serve this country ought to have the opportunity to serve it in uniform, and they do now. And we strengthen our alliance with Israel. We continue to support Israel. I made that first trip 20 years ago, an ADL trip. 1991, when hundreds of thousands of Jews from the Soviet Union were making Aliyah and fulfilling a dream to live in a free and more prosperous life in their historic homeland. As Director of the CIA and Secretary of Defense, I believe deeply in our obligation to maintain close ties with Israel so that we could confront our common enemies together, working closely with Mayor Dagan at Mossad and Ehud Barak and others. And over the course of time, we did everything we could to ensure that Israel would have the wherewithal to be able to provide for its security. We have no better friend, no better ally in the world than Israel. My fear today that I will share with you is that I sense that whether it is out of exhaustion of the last 10 years or fear of being embroiled in another conflict, there is a growing mood of isolationism in this country. And the fact is that this remains a very dangerous world. We're fighting a war. We continue to confront terrorism. Yes, we've gone after al-Qaeda's core leadership, but there are now al-Qaeda nodes in Yemen, in Somalia, in Syria, in Mali, throughout North Africa. We continue to have a threat from North Korea as they test ICBM capabilities and nuclear weapons. We have instability and fragility across the Middle East. We have rising powers like China, who pose unique challenges, old powers like Russia that continue to challenge our policies. We are witnessing a whole new battlefront in warfare called cyber, and I do believe that cyber could very well be the Pearl Harbor of the future, so we need to protect ourselves from that as well. And all of this happens at a time when we are imperiled by the gridlock in Washington. This is a time when we must maintain our military strength and our role in the world as a world leader. We cannot retreat from the responsibilities the United States has in the world of today. In fact, I'll tell you something. If you ask me what the biggest threat to our national security is today, it is the fact that our political leaders cannot come together to deal with this nation's problems. This gridlock imperils our national security. Let me tell you, as a result of sequester, as a result of the shutdown, we are hurting our military readiness in this country. We are making it much more difficult to respond to a major crisis outside of the war zones. The shutdowns and the threats to financially default this country have sent a message of weakness to the world, and it is all avoidable. These are self-inflicted wounds that frankly can be avoided. Avoided if our elected leaders come together, make the compromises necessary to govern the country. In my 50 years of public service, I've seen Washington at its best and Washington at its worst. But even though I see a Washington that is dysfunctional today, I've also seen it work. Republicans and Democrats coming together to protect our country. And I believe it can happen again. But our leaders have to be willing to take risks. The real strength of America, lies in the American people, lies in those men and women in uniform who are willing to put their lives on the line in order to protect this country. That's where the real strength of America lies. Let me end by telling you the story of one family that took the risk that I just talked about. In January of 2012, in Balan Province, Afghanistan, 3rd Battalion, 1st Special Forces, Sergeant First Class Benjamin Wise, 34, an Army Ranger on his 4th deployment, was struck by enemy fire and he died several days later in Germany. He left behind a wife and 2 sons and a daughter. As was my practice, and it's one of the toughest things we do as Secretary of Defense, is to write a handwritten note to the parents of those who've lost loved ones. But what made this letter different as I was writing it was I realized it was the second time I had written to the Wise family. Ben's brother, Jeremy Wise, was one of the 7 CIA officers who died in the bombing at Host in December of 2009. These are the families that are sacrificing for our country. If they are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, to fight and die in order to protect this country, then surely our political leaders can find a little bit of that courage in order to govern this nation. A few months after I visited the Host base, I remember that on the wall there was a verse from the Old Testament, from the prophet Isaiah. They had it up on a plaque as I went through the base. And the saying is this: "And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?' And then I said, 'Here I am. Send me.'" In Hebrew, as you know, it's hineni. Send me. That is the call of the trumpet. That is the call to service It is the call, the timeless call, to serve and to sacrifice, and it binds us in a very sacred mission. The ADL has led that mission, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, not just for this award, but for what you do in fighting discrimination, so that an immigrant kid from Monterey could grow up to live the American dream, be Secretary of Defense of the greatest country the world has ever known. Thank you all for what you have done for America and for the world these past 100 years. God bless this country, and God bless all of you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.